working so his life don't fade away. To spend his days denying that he's got no time for flying and free. While high up on his own, ego flies alone, he is free.
In the early 70s in Los Angeles, there was a club in the Hollywood area called the Troubadour. And this was the place that all budding musicians went to be seen, to exchange ideas, to be heard, and hopefully to get record deals.
The Eagles were part of that West Coast family tree, which included Jackson Browne and Linda Ronstadt and the Flying Burrito Brothers. You know, it was part country rock, part singer-songwriter, part cocaine cowboy outlaws, that whole scene. And it was a whole scene, and it was a scene that was based around the Troubadour and Hollywood at the time.
The most important thing to realise about the Eagles is they were a crossover. They achieved something which hadn't really been done before, which is they took country, folk, and they managed to kind of mix this with rock and pop and created really a new sound.
They were all trying to create a new sound. They were all great fans of country music from Nashville. But it was a little staid and it was a little behind the times, a little boring. So what they were trying to create was country rock.
What they could do is actually make it accessible to an FM market in America. And that's their influence and heritage. But what they actually did as well is take a country tradition that took in the likes of Hank Williams and Willie Nelson and so many others, and actually took those people and introduced them through the Eagles' music to a new generation.
The most interesting thing about the Eagles, of course, was that none of them actually came from California. They all saw it as the promised land. They began their career as the Eagles essentially as a result of working in Linda Ronstadt's backing band.
John Boylan, Linda Ronstadt's manager, in 1971 was looking for musicians for a 2-month American tour to back up his artist. And he got Glenn Frey, Randy Meisner and Bernie Leadon on board. Frey was a guitarist, Meisner a bassist, and Leadon was also a guitarist. And between them they played with people like Poco, Rick Nelson, Bob Seger, the Flying Burrito Brothers, so it had a good pedigree. What was missing was a drummer.
In May 1971, Don Henley is sitting in the Troubadour Club in downtown LA and he's absolutely desperate. He's had a band which released an album. The band was called Shiloh, but this album went up in a puff of smoke and came down like a lead balloon and went absolutely nowhere. He'd spent 4 years kicking around LA trying to get started, trying to get somewhere in the music business. But unfortunately, he's just reached a point where he was literally the next week about to head off back to Northwest Texas and call it a day. And he's sitting in the corner of the Troubadour Club, which is one of the most famous haunts in Los Angeles for all musicians. And suddenly up comes Glenn Frey. And he pops a beer in his hand and says, "You're not looking too happy, what's the problem?" And sort of Don Henley goes on about how life's been hard and the band's gone down and everything. And Glenn Frey says, "Well, actually, I'm looking for a drummer to replace the one we've had in Linda Ronstadt's backing band." So he asked Don Henley whether he would fancy taking up the job.
His first interaction with Glenn Frey wasn't too promising. They didn't seem to get on very well, but after a few drinks and stuff, they found that they had more in common than they thought. And this idea of forming a band gradually developed.
They both realised they had the same kind of dream, the same mission they were on. So Don Henley said, "Yeah, I'll go for that." And the pair of them started off on Linda Ronstadt's tour, which kicked off in Washington, D.C. But it wasn't to be until 4 months later, in September, when the tour had reached Florida, that the manager of Linda Ronstadt, who's a guy called John Boylan, he brought along Randy Meisner and Bernie Leadon and put them on stage with the other two for the first time. And that night, apparently, it was just sheer magic.
Silver threads and golden needles cannot mend this heart of mine, and I dare not drown my sorrow in the warmth of your eyes. You can't buy my
went on tour with Ronstadt for 2 months and found that the four of them really gelled very well. And they all had songwriting talents, all had individual ambitions, and they all felt they could achieve something more than just being the backing musicians for one Linda Ronstadt tour.
Although they were supposedly going to be the backing band for Linda Ronstadt, Glenn Frey had other ideas.
Parallel to all this, that wily entrepreneur David Geffen is forming the record company Asylum. Now, David Geffen was on the lookout for aspiring singer-songwriters for the label, and as part of his talent spotting, he was very much focused on Jackson Browne. His secretary had told him that he should really go and seek out this character called Jackson Browne, which he did, and he wanted to sign him, and he visited his house, and of course staying at that house was J.D. Souther and Glenn Frey, and so before you knew it, he'd signed J.D. Souther as a solo singer-songwriter. Glenn Frey had wanted Souther maybe to be in the band, but Geffen said, no, you know, find a band of your own.
David Geffen had advised Glenn Frey not to go the solo route, which was quite popular at the time because, you know, there were lots of musicians like Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, who were making real careers as solo artists, and Glenn Frey thought that might be the way forward for him. But David Geffen, who is, as we probably all know, one of the big players in the music business over the years, recognised that Glenn Frey's talent was in being a team leader, and he saw him as having a group. He thought that the group was the way forward for Glenn, as opposed to being an individual singer-songwriter, performer, etc. So he said to him, go see if you can sort out a band. So although Glenn Frey was supposedly getting musicians for Linda Ronstadt's band, he was actually quietly trying to form his own band.
She signed me to a contract, baby said it would all be so lifelong. I looked around then for a reason when there wasn't something more, blame it on. But if time makes a difference while we're gone, tell me now and I won't be hanging on. There's a train leaves here this morning, I don't know what I might be on.
It wasn't to be until the end of September that Glenn Frey, with the other three members of the band, presented himself in David Geffen's office and said, right, here's the band you told me to get together. I've got this band together. We want a contract. And what's amazing is they had no demo record. They didn't even have a name. They weren't called the Eagles at that moment. They were still just the backing band. And David Geffen, bless him, just wrote out a cheque for £125,000 and said, okay guys, get on with that. And he sorted them out some rehearsals and some gigging time. And then he sent the band up to Aspen in Colorado, which is a rather posh skiing resort, where they spent a month, 6 weeks, sort of honing their gig set, sort of doing, you know, 4 sets a night, etc., etc. And by the time they came back from Aspen, they decided on the name, and they had a few demo tracks ready to go, and the Eagles had been hatched.
Well, I'm running down a road trying to loosen my load. I got 7 women on my mind. 4 that wanna own me, 2 that wanna stone me, 1 so she's a friend of mine. Take it easy, take it easy, or let the sound of your own wheels drive you crazy. Lighten up while you still can. Don't even try to understand. Just find a place and take your stand. Take it easy.
The Eagles, when they came on the scene, were really just one of a number of kind of country rock oriented bands, guys with long hair and blue jeans, in and around Los Angeles at the time. I don't think anyone would have necessarily thought these guys are going to get a lot further than anybody else.
Along with the Joni Mitchells and Neil Youngs of this world, they wanted to be seen as serious singer-songwriters, not just, you know, so they wanted to be both country rock, they wanted to be singer-songwriters, they wanted it all, and they wanted to be millionaires and singles artists and albums artists. They wanted to be everything.
I mean, you've got to remember that Linda Ronstadt also, you know, came out of country rock, and she was huge in the 70s too, you know, and Jackson Browne was pretty big, and it was a whole enclave. It was Southern California. They were all on Asylum Records. David Geffen was behind them. You know, he turned this little gang of men and women who hung out at the Troubadour Cafe, he turned them into superstars. You know, he saw that you know, this laid-back sound could become huge. The Eagles is sort of, or rather Eagles, is a perfect introduction to the band in the sense that it shows that they can do a bit of everything. You know, I think that's the important thing. I think, you know, people think of the Eagles primarily as a sort of country rock band, but actually if you go back and revisit the record, you realise it's not really a country rock record. There's 2 or 3 country rock songs in it, but there's a whole lot of other stuff going on there.
Well, the first album, The Eagles, was also one of the first records to be released on Asylum Records, and for that reason alone, there was a degree of press attention focused upon it.
At first, as in most debut albums, it didn't create an almighty splash. It was released early in 1972, and there was no real take-up by the music press at first.
Critically, they were sort of well received, but nobody was particularly ecstatic at the time about them, because there was lots of other really good artists around. Crosby, Stills and Nash were doing not dissimilar things. Lots and lots of people. It was a real melting pot in Los Angeles at that time for that style of music.
It wasn't until Take It Easy was released as a single, which eventually reached number 12 in the USA charts, that people began to stand up and take notice of what the Eagles were all about. In fact, that year, Rolling Stone voted them as one of the best debut bands of the year, and they figured that it was, how can I put it, they were kind of not successful immediately, but it began to grow slowly. But to give you an example, it wasn't until October that the album actually peaked at number 22 in the USA hit parade. But it wasn't without its problems. Basically, it certainly wasn't an overnight success. And the Eagles found themselves playing concerts where, for instance, they'd go through the first 7 songs and they'd get absolutely no reaction from the crowd at all. But as soon as they played Take It Easy, oh yes, it's that band, and they'd get a bit of a reaction. So the Eagles' self-titled debut album was by no means a critical or a commercial success overnight. However, that first album did eventually achieve platinum status, selling over 20 million copies.
Well, I'm standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. It's such a fine sight to see. It's a girl, my lord, in a flatbed Ford, slowing down to take a look at me. Well, come on, baby, don't say baby. I gotta know if your sweet love is gonna save me. We
The album itself in America got to number 22, I believe, in the Billboard chart, and it actually had 3 hit singles. Take It Easy, which has become an absolute classic with the Eagles, co-written by Jackson Browne. In fact, let's be honest, mostly written by Jackson Browne with Glenn Frey additions. Witchy Woman and Peaceful Easy Feeling were all top 20 hits, and in the case of Witchy Woman they broke into the top 10 as well. What they were doing was country rock as we knew it in the 1960s, but adapting it for American FM demands, so becoming much more aware of the melodic rock of the time, so they had a more mainstream appeal.
Take it easy, take it easy, or let the sound of your own wheels make you crazy.
Take It Easy was made for radio. It had that kind of anthemic quality almost, as kind of laid back as it was.
It's got a certain laid-back country rock appeal, and I think really summed up what the Eagles were to be about, which is that combination of the country and the bluegrass with a very contemporary melodic hard rock edge and an understanding of what makes those things work. And it's got a beautiful lush harmonic feel to it as well.
It was an easygoing, optimistic, sunny, optimistic track about California, and the title itself summed up the easy living lifestyle seemingly.
Take It Easy is almost like a kind of manifesto for, how to be laid back in Southern California in 1972.
It's not so much the music, I think, which really caught the American public's eye. It was more the ethos and the philosophy. If you listen to the lyrics of Take It Easy, it's all about a guy who's actually going out with 7 women at once, which, is kind of interesting. And at the time there was this vision of the Californian dream, where all the women were 5'10", size 8, beautifully bronzed, and outnumbered the men by 3 to 1. Well, that's the sort of mythology. It wasn't actually like that. They outnumbered the men only 2 to 1. But hey, you got to do what you can do.
We ought to take it easy. Tell your woman that she's got to shake.
I can remember as however old I was, like 12 years old, being into glam rock and hearing Take It Easy and thinking, my gosh, this is the sound of California as I imagined it. And it wasn't a place I'd been at that point. So yes, it was sort of a world away from the sound of Slade and Gary Glitter.
Take It Easy summed up the philosophy of a lifestyle. And in the late 60s, 70s, that's what music was about. It wasn't just about a few songs on an album. It was about a lifestyle. It was about an ethos of living. It was about philosophy. Almost even spiritual and religious matters came into music. And that's what the Eagles managed to capture for the American and ultimately the English public, in as much as they sold the California dream to the planet.
Witchy Woman, on the other hand, gives you the more soulful side of the Eagles. It was written by Don Henley and Bernie Leadon, and it's much more sultry and black in feel. It's not a country rock song. And it's the first of a number of quite R&B-ish tracks in the Eagles' oeuvre.
Witchy Woman is a soulful ballad. It sums up Don Henley's main contribution on the album. It was one of the 2 tracks that he wrote. And again, it's about being in a relationship with women, coming and going, with there being sort of not long, stable, standing relationships, and the fact that this was quite a rough and tough world to be in, where, yeah, guys could go out with 2 or 3 women, but some of the women managed to be witchy women too, and they got their own back.
I know you wanna love her. Let me tell you, brother, she's been sleeping in the devil's bed. There's some rumors going round that someone's on the ground. She'll rock you in the nighttime till your skin turns red. Ooh, witchy woman, see how high she flies. Ooh, witchy woman, she got the moon in her eye.
The second track was a hit again. It was Witchy Woman, which again fitted the image of the Eagles. That tribal Native American beat was added to it, which gave it a kind of, you know, the cover of the album was taken in the Joshua Tree Desert, so it fitted the whole Indian imagery as well.
Witchy Woman again had that feeling, although slightly more edgy than perhaps Take It Easy ever was. To me, those are the 2 standout tracks on the record. The rest of them, to a large extent, I always felt were a bit filler. They were starting to feel their way forward, the Eagles, but hadn't really found a direction that really meant this is the Eagles.
I like the way your sparkling earrings lay against your skin so brown. And I want to sleep with you in the desert tonight, with a billion stars all around. 'Cause I got a peaceful, easy feeling, and I know you won't let me down.
The third hit was Peaceful Easy Feeling, which was a kind of, you know, almost a metaphor for Woodstock, if you will. Peaceful, easy feeling, you know, love and peace and all the rest of it. Pretty well exemplify the hippie ideals, and they captured it very well. And I think it was one of the most successful, probably, country rock albums of its time. I mean, you'd be hard pushed to suggest anything before in that country rock genre that did as well as that. I mean, you know, Poco and the Flying Burrito Brothers and all those people hadn't had that degree of success. So it was a fantastic start for them, and you could hardly ask for better. They'd hit the FM airwaves with the album, and suddenly they had 3 major hit singles, which was amazing.
And I got a peaceful, easy feeling, and I know you won't let me down. I'm already standing on the ground.
I think the audience at the time, you know, had seen country rock emerging ever since probably Dylan did John Wesley Harding in January 1968, which was released. The Byrds had released Sweetheart of the Rodeo, and the band did music from Big Pink. But these were essentially underground albums. They were highly respected in the rock press, but none of them had that really big hit single that translated into the mainstream, and the Eagles did that successfully. And I think the timing was just right. I mean, everybody, the pioneers had already laid the groundwork for them, and the Eagles were there to pick it up. They were good players, they had good songs, they were well rehearsed. They were together. Their chops, as they said at the time, were together, and they were ready to go for it.
I don't think it's their best album. I don't think it's a great album. I think there are weak moments on it. But it did deliver in Take It Easy and Peaceful Easy Feeling in particular. It sort of delivered sort of soft LA country rock, blue jean kind of early 70s music on a plate, and it really it gave it a kind of slick, professional sheen that it sort of needed to kind of lift it to the next level commercially.
I'm 21, as strong as I can be. I know what freedom means to me, and I can't give a reason why I should ever want to die. I got no cause to be afraid or fear that life will ever fade. 'Cause as I watch the ride...
Desperado was the second Eagles album. It's my favourite, just ahead of even the likes of Hotel California, and it's a very different album to their debut, whereas their debut took country rock more into the American FM format. Their second album, Desperado, was strongly rooted in American bluegrass and country tradition.
This album was in fact, in the main, written by Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Don Henley was to write 9 of the 11 tracks, and this was the start of the Henley-Frey dominance of the Eagles band.
They say a man should have a stock and trade, but me, I'll find another way. I believe in getting what you can, and there ain't no stopping this young man, 'cause I'm young and fast as I can be. I know what freedom means to me, and I can't give a reason why I should ever want to die. Yeah, and I can't give a reason why I should ever want to die.
The second album syndrome is something that's well known in the music business, because unfortunately what tends to happen is bands may have been kicking around for 5, 10, sometimes 15 years before they actually get their breakthrough. And the first album tends to contain the best of all this material from all those years. And then suddenly, having had the critical success with the first album, you're left with the second album, and that's normally wanted quite quickly by the record producers and by the music business. They want a follow-up which is going to be as successful as the first one, but unfortunately the band don't have this 10 or 15 years worth of material with which to go back. So the Eagles were looking for something interesting in order to come up with a good idea for their second album.
It's a concept album, effectively, inspired by the story of a late 19th century American outlaw gang called the Dalton Gang, who made their name robbing banks and trains.
Its origins began actually in the pre-Eagles era. It goes right back to that house in Echo Park that Glenn Frey shared with Jackson Browne and J.D. Souther. They had a book around, and it was a photo book on gunfighters, and that gave them this idea of coming up with a series of songs, possibly an concept album even, on kind of rebels and outlaws, but at the same time connect it as metaphorically with their own lives as aspiring rock stars. And they'd already seen enough from the success of their first album to project this image of themselves as on the rise, and there they were, running out as outlaws themselves.
They were Doolin-Dalton, high or low, it was the same. Easy money and faithless women, red-eye whiskey for the pain. this call to you from where they stood. Lay down your law books now, they're no damn good. Better keep on moving.
Doolin-Dalton was the opening track on the album, and it set the scene.
For some people, Doolin-Dalton might be considered a somewhat understated track as an opening song, certainly compared to, say, Take It Easy, which jumps out of the speakers at you.
I think if you went to a record company today with Doolin-Dalton as the opening track of the album, they'd say wrong, because it really is not the greatest opener. But when you see it when you listen to the whole album and you see it as a conceptual album, then it makes sense.
It eases people in. It doesn't hit you. It actually comes in with a certain sense of, good grief, this is very country, it's very bluegrass, this is not quite what we're expecting from the band who gave us Take It Easy, but it really opens up in terms of this is the sort of album it's going to be. So it is not misleading. It actually leads you into what happens later on.
Doolin-Dalton was the first song written for the album. It was part of the original concept, which went right back to the Echo Park days when they were thinking about composing a song or two about outlaws, and this is where it all started. It was written by Henley and Frey, but it was also written by Jackson Browne and J.D. Souther, so there was 4 songwriters on that, so it was quite a big statement for them, I think. It was very much the overture, There was 3 versions of it on the album, by the way. I mean, it was the opening track, there was an instrumental track of it, and it was used as a reprise at the end. So, why waste it? It was used 3 times.
The Queen of Diamonds let you down. She was just an empty fable. The Queen of Hearts, you say you never met. The twisted fate has found you out, and it's finally turned the table. Stole your dreams and paid you with regret. Desperado. Is there gonna be anything left? Is there gonna be? Sealed your fate away on time. Ain't it hard when you're alone in the center rain? Now there's no time left to go. Is there gonna be anything? Only stardust. Maybe tomorrow.
The repetition of Doolin-Dalton, I feel, was an attempt to make this concept album work, as if there was a thread going through it. In as much as Doolin-Dalton opens, it comes in as track 7 as an instrumental, and then it's referenced in the Desperado reprise right at the end. And it was an attempt to give the album a cohesiveness, to give it a wholeness.
Let's just say that what they wanted to do was remind people at the beginning and the middle and at the end exactly what the concept was.
There's a card game in the corner, and the barmaid smiled at me. Well, I tipped her a silver dollar, and she brought me a drink for free. Well, the town folk call her the cheap one, and the gamblers call her Flo. Come on, set 'em up again. I got me a friend, and I think I'm getting out of control.
Out of Control is the most out of context track on the Desperado album. The reason being, it's a rocker. Nothing else on the album rocks as hard or even close to being as hard as Out of Control, which is the 3rd track on the album, and it suddenly they take off and go into this real boogie, hard rock and roll driving track, which is completely different to everything else on the record, which is much more laid back, much more introspective, much more about the blues and the bluegrass and country roots. And suddenly you got this dynamic contemporary hard rock track going in there. So in a way it's a bit of a shocker, especially coming so early on when nothing else really follows.
That was just their rock song on the album, really, if you will. It was just a song about being out of control in a bar. It's basically a barroom brawl song as much as anything, which kind of tenuously connects the Western imagery of playing poker and having fun and fighting in a bar with the modern rock conceit of, hey, playing poker and fighting in a bar, again, you know, it's very easy for the Eagles to get a song like that in and just make it a rock and roll song. They used that one live. It fitted in the centre of the album, you know, reasonably well. Kind of almost filler, I think, to a certain extent. I never thought it was a great song, but they needed something to break up the ballads, and that did that reasonably successfully.
Well, if anybody's looking for trouble, you know I'm the one you wanna try. Well, I'm finding a man who wants you, and I don't care who or why. You got to gamble on your story. You got no guts, you get no glory. And I bet my money on an ace in the hole. I think I'm getting out of control.
The problem with the whole Desperado is its schizophrenic nature. There's a really good up-tempo track, Out of Control, but you're listening to this album and you're out there in the Wild West and you've got this feeling and it's all kind of mellow, and then suddenly it's almost as if you're transplanted to Reading Rock Festival and you've got Slade or Judas Priest out there giving it 110%, and it's just, what on earth is going on? But as we all know now, this was really the angle that Glenn Frey was trying to push the band towards. He wanted a rock band. He was into drugs, sex and rock and roll. He didn't want any of this country boy pap. So he was heading out there, and that's why tracks like Out of Control got on the album. But if you listen to Desperado start to finish, you can end up feeling really schizophrenic, because it goes from being very country to very rocky, back to country, then to pop, and you don't really feel like you've got one particular genre of music in your hand.
It's another tequila sunrise, staring slowly across the sky. They said goodbye. He was just a hired hand, working on the dreams he planned to try. The days go by. Every night when the sun goes down, just another lonely boy in a Texas town. She's out running riot.
The most obvious single from the Desperado album was Tequila Sunrise. It was a much more commercial track than even Desperado was.
Tequila Sunrise, basically in the key of G again, and this one has really the only thing in it that's of great interest, that's slightly different, is it goes from a G major to a G6 major. But the way they do that is by just doing a little country figure which goes so they're hammering on and creating the sixth note of the G major scale. There it is there, there's the root and the sixth. So they're going. So it's a little lick at the beginning of the tune, and it comes back every time he's about to start a verse again.
Tequila Sunrise is one of those songs which sums up again a way of life. It's about a philosophy. It's not a brilliant song. It's quite a nice crossover between country rock. It's not particularly earth-shattering in its content or totally amazing in its revelations. It's a song about a guy enjoying going down a bar and hopefully getting laid one day. This is what it amounted to, and I think it was good in as much as it sums up the philosophy of the band, but it didn't really say a lot musically. It wasn't an absolutely stunning track, which is what you need to get into the top 20.
Take another shot of courage. Wonder why the right words never come. You just get enough.
Tequila Sunrise only got to number 64 in the Billboard charts, which certainly wasn't as good as the first three songs that were off the previous album. Why that happened, I've no idea, to tell you the truth. I mean, you could argue that it wasn't a rock single, but it was certainly, you know, it was up there to my mind with Take It Easy. It's a song that has certainly survived in the repertoire of the Eagles. Whenever they've done reunion tours, they've got to play Tequila Sunrise. It fitted the image of what the Eagles were about very well. It was an extremely commercial melody. The first time I heard it, I thought, yeah, this is an obvious single, and yet it didn't make it. The problem there is once you've released a mid-tempo or a ballad as a single and it doesn't make it, the common wisdom is you don't release another one. So that means Desperado isn't going to be the second single. So what they did was they released a song called Outlaw Man, which was also on the album, which to my mind was a mistake.
Outlaw Man didn't really make any headway at all. It's not a particularly outstanding track on the album, and it wasn't a major success at all.
It wasn't even written by the Eagles. It was written by David Blue, who was another artist on Asylum Records. And the title fitted the concept, and okay, it was about outlaws, and you had that link between the modern outlaw and the wild western outlaw, and it was a kind of okay song. It actually reached number 59, which is 5 places better than Tequila Sunrise, but it's not exactly setting the world on fire. So you've ended up with 2 songs from Desperado, and none of them have even reached the top 50. Let alone the top 40.
Given the fact that the Eagles' self-titled debut had done so well commercially, top 30 album, 3 top 20 singles, Desperado, the follow-up, was comparatively a flop because it was much more of a rootsy album. It wasn't reaching out to American FM format the way they'd done with their debut.
In order to get any success in America, you need airplay. And what happened was the country stations, country and western, all those around Nashville, all 47 of them, had basically got this album out. They'd played 2 or 3 tracks, and then they'd come to the Out of Control track and gone, oh my God, what on earth is this? We can't stand this, Henry, stick it in the bin, because it's just too rocky. And then all the guys at the rock and roll station, they picked up this album with a bunch of guys dressed in cowboy outfits, and they went, oh my goodness gracious me, what's going on here? Or words to that effect. This just ain't rock and roll. So the rock and roll guys didn't pick up on it.
The Eagles themselves were disappointed and kind of annoyed that it didn't do well. And they to some extent blamed the producer Glyn Johns for not beefing up their sound in the way that they wanted to. Glyn Johns had a different idea of what the Eagles were than they did themselves. I mean, he saw them as a softer, more acoustic, country-ish thing, perhaps a little closer to the sort of acoustic side of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And the Eagles themselves wanted to be more of a rock band, I think particularly Glenn Frey. So you know, I think, ultimately felt that Desperado was a bit kind of limp. It was a bit wimpy. It didn't have enough it wasn't beefy enough. And that was one of the reasons why Johns got the elbow pretty much for the following record.
Concept albums are always difficult. You know, they can be extraordinarily successful or not. And it should always be remembered that Desperado was a platinum record. It did sell. In the long term, it sold very well. So it's you know, it reached platinum sales. So you can't say it was not a success. It just took a long time. It was a slow burner, I suppose.
Over the years, it's become critically acknowledged as a far fuller and far more fulfilling album. To me, this is a genuine debut from the Eagles because it represented what they really were about, which was taking roots Americana, if you want, and opening it up to a wider audience, but doing it from this point of view of being roots Americana.
Desperado, why don't you come to your senses? You've been out riding fences for so long now. Oh, you're a hard one, but I know that you got your reasons. These things that are pleasing you, it hurt you somehow. Don't you draw the queen of diamonds, boy? She'll beat you if she's able. You know the queen of hearts is always your best bet. And that seems to me some fine things have been laid upon your table, but you only want the ones that you can't get.
Desperado, I think, is one of the all-time great songs. I mean, it sums up for men all over the world what it feels like to be a bit of a loner, to be a bit desperate, to be out there on your own, chasing your dream, up and down the hills and vales, through the rough and through the smooth.
Desperado itself, you know, is probably the, you know, the standout ballad. It's certainly the first instance of Henley's ability to write ballads, that kind of plaintive, soaring voice.
It's sung by Don Henley, who is a Texan, and if you listen to the chord structure, and if you were to play it very slowly, it would be like a southern gospel tune.
Don't you draw the queen of diamonds, boy? She'll beat you if she's able. You know the queen of hearts is always your best bet. And that seems to me some fine things have been laid upon your table, but you only want the ones that you can't get. Desperado, oh, you ain't getting no younger.
It's often puzzled me as to why Desperado, the title track of the second album, never was put out as a single. In fact, it's become, probably over the years, the most acclaimed and acknowledged track from that record.
I think they didn't release it as a single because it wasn't the direction they were going. Glenn Frey and Don Henley were both looking towards having a full-on rock and roll band in maybe 2-3 years. That's where they were going. Desperado might have singled them out as being more of a poppy ballad sort of a band, and I think they were really desperate to sort of shake that label, to get rid of that.
I think by that time they decided it probably wasn't worth the candle and even bothering to release a third single from the album if the first two hadn't made it. So, you know, Desperado kind of got left behind, and yet it is an Eagles standard. I mean, it's you know, in many ways their signature song. It's a song that's been covered by many people as well. I mean, Linda Ronstadt herself covered it, Bonnie Raitt covered it, the Carpenters covered it. It's a song familiar to many people who've never heard of the Eagles, probably.
Don't you think it's cold in the wintertime? Fireworks blow and the sun won't shine. It's hard to tell the nighttime from the day. You're losing all your heart to love. Ain't it funny how the feeling goes away?
Desperado was definitely an album track. It belongs in the swing and flow of the album, and as a track apart didn't seem to quite work at that time in the way that other choices such as Tequila Sunrise did. So I think it was probably a clever choice. I don't think Desperado would have been a hit.
They did make the right decision. I think Tequila Sunrise was the more obvious song, but of course once it, you know, if Tequila Sunrise had been a #1 single or a top 10 single, I'm sure Desperado would have been added to the list.
In retrospect, they might have released it as, you know, a second or third single if they'd had a bit more success with Tequila Sunrise. But because they didn't have a great deal of chart success with the singles, they probably thought, well, forget it, we'll get to the next album and see where we go from there.
I sense that perhaps they were worried that if they released another single which wasn't particularly representative of their sound and representative of their ethos and their band, that it would have dived even more and perhaps could have got them into deep waters.
He was a poor boy, raised in a small family. He kinda had a craving for something no one else could see. They said that he was crazy, the kind that no lady should need. He ran off to the city, then wandered around in the street. He wants to dance, oh yeah, he wants to sing, oh yeah, he wants to see the lights a flashing and listen to the thunder ring. He saw it in a window, the mark of a new kind of man.
A Certain Kind of Fool is the closest the band really gets to what they did on the first album.
Certain Kind of Fool was another rocker, and it was an attempt to, I think, add a bit of passion to the album.
While the first album, the Eagles record, had a much more country rock going into American FM approach, that's very rarely the case on the Desperado album. A Certain Kind of Fool is really the closest they get. It's much more, to be honest, an AOR track.
Basically, the chords, the first two chords, are very straightforward. It's a D sus4, which sounds like this, to a D major, and then an A sus4 to an A major.
And practice 4 days without rest. And then one day he fell.
Certain Kind of Fool is perhaps one of the most autobiographical of the songs on the album, because it depicts a young man who basically wants to get away from his hometown. He wants to visit this big city. He'd like to hear his name being talked about and perhaps see his name in lights. It's about that dream of leaving the small hometown and heading off out into the city to try and achieve fame and fortune. And really, this was the road which Don Henley and Glenn Frey were both on.
It did realise more fully the concept of this vision between the old Wild West and the modern cowboy outlaw, which is what the Eagles were trying to define. And you know, the lyrics in that song, it starts off with a guy that discovers a shiny gun in a window, and it attracts his attention, and he goes out and works with it in the desert, or until he's a hot player. And it's that same old thing of somebody looking in and finding a shiny guitar and going out and rehearsing until he's ready to take the world on. And it's got images of an outlaw on a poster, which reminds you of the rock star on the poster. And it ends with it wasn't for the money, at least it wasn't for the money. At least it didn't start that way. It wasn't for the running, but now he's running every day.
It wasn't for the money, at least it didn't start that way. It wasn't for the running, but now he's running every day.
The outlaw starts not necessarily just for the money, but for the thrill of it, and suddenly the money takes over. They're just robbing banks in the end for the sake of it, and in some ways the Eagles fear that that's how they were going to end up, just being in it maybe for the money. And now they're running every day, and I guess by that time they're already feeling a sense of jaundice about the whole thing. There's a lot of jaundice and disillusionment evident on that Desperado album, even though it's only their second album. It's almost like they've already been through the mill to a certain extent, and some of those songs reflect that, and A Certain Kind of Fool is certainly one of those.
It seems like a dream now, it was so long ago. The moon burned so bright and the time went so slow, and I swore that I loved her and gave her a ring. The bluebird was high on the wing. Whatever happened to Saturday night, finding a sweetheart and holding her tight? She said, tell me, won't tell me, was I alright? Whatever happened to Saturday night?
I think people have mixed feelings about Desperado. I think it's kind of more of a piece than the first album. The first album is perhaps a little too kind of eclectic. It doesn't quite know what it wants to be. The second album, is a more seamless experience. It has its kind of rockier moments, but it's something that sort of flows from beginning to end, perhaps a bit better than the first.
In a way, Desperado stands alone. In a funny sort of way, I think On the Border, the Eagles' third album, was more of a follow-up to their self-titled debut than a follow-up to Desperado. I think with Desperado, they got something out of their system. They really wanted a rootsy heritage record. Strange thing is, I don't think they could have made their debut really rootsy because it wouldn't have sold very well. Having established something of a commercial base, they could almost get away with it and then say, okay, we've done it, we've indulged ourselves, now it's time to move forward.
Desperado sums up really a transition phase in the Eagles, going from their original debut album through to what would ultimately be Hotel California. But while they're in this state of transition, you don't seem to get a real feel of what this band is all about.
The work's been appreciated probably more internationally later on because the songs became more well known, and the covers of Desperado helped it to be so as well, and that became a signature tune of sorts They had success with live albums. They had success with greatest hits albums. So the songs on Desperado, which originally, you know, were known to relatively few, if you're talking about an international mainstream audience, you know, by later in the 70s, most people knew Desperado as well as anything else, and it's had accumulated sales, which turned it into a platinum album. So over the years, you know, it became more and more successful, and now it's you know, there's a lot of people out there that regard it as the Eagles' best.
For my money, and this is a personal opinion, I think Desperado is up there in the top 2 or 3 Eagles albums of all time. I think it is such a wonderful record, such an evocative record of their roots, and such a monumental epic in its own right, in its own way, and also so visual. And I really feel that while Hotel California is obviously their greatest triumph, and deservedly so, Desperado should be put right up there as a truly magnificent piece of work that pays homage to their roots, but also proved that they can make their roots accessible to a public for the modern era. At the time it wasn't a huge success, but I think over a period of time people have realised its influence and its importance, and it has become a landmark country rock album.